Welcome back, everybody. This is the fourth video covering the Travis Scott Astroworld Tragedy. Before we talk about the video overview today, I want to take a moment and offer my and hopefully all of your sincere thoughts, prayers, wishes, whatever you want to send to the family of little 9-year-old Ezra Blount, who was trampled by the crowd in this tragedy, has been fighting for his life for the last week, and a couple of days ago lost that battle. Again, it's an absolute tragedy. So let's talk about the four areas of the video today. We're going to do a lawsuit recap. The number and value of lawsuits are both up substantially. And again, I sound like a broken record here. It's bad news for Travis Scott. Second, we're going to game plan a few possible outcomes of this whole fiasco and how this might end for some of the parties here. Third, we're going to do a couple of brief little corrections to some of the videos shown previously. I don't know that it makes that much of a difference. In fact, it may even make the situation worse for Travis Scott, LiveNation, Astroworld Promotion, all these guys. Fourth, we're going to talk about some new evidence that, again, I say discovered. It just means it was probably out there on Twitter. And because I'm not a full-time YouTuber, I hadn't found it yet. Without any further ado, let's get started. As y'all know by now, I like to start with a lawyer joke. Do you know what's the difference between a lawyer and a jellyfish? Well, one is a spineless, gutless, heartless, venomous, slimy, nasty creature whose mouth and anus are the same orifice. The other one lives in the ocean. Now, let's talk about our first area, which is a recap of what lawsuits have been filed. Last time we talked, we were somewhere north of 40. There's been a flurry of lawsuits. We are now over 200. As we've talked about before, generally in these cases, I would say the number of lawsuits is a much more reliable indicator than the amount of damages claimed in the lawsuits, because the amount of damages claimed can just be like any arbitrary number. They can just be more or less made up, provided that there's some sort of justification for it. Now, in addition, there are two other notable things. First of all, we have this guy who's saying that he thinks that the damages for his lawsuits could be into the billions of dollars. Now, like I said before, I don't put a whole lot of stock into the particular numbers that are in the pleadings, but $1 billion is a really big number. Also, we have this guy who's filed over 90 lawsuits on behalf of various plaintiffs for this Astroworld tragedy. He's represented George Floyd, Trayvon Martin, etc., etc. There are, as I said, many other high-profile plaintiff firms, but here at a minimum, you have two very high-profile lawyers who have made the news, who are throwing chips on this case big time. The other thing that tells you that stuff's about to get real for Travis Scott here is that the paparazzi have been camped out outside of his mansion in Houston since the tragedy happened. He's been holed up inside with his girlfriend and nobody's coming out, etc., etc. However, they caught pictures of several high-profile Houston defense attorneys visiting the house. This defense team is not going to be cheap. He's got several attorneys, some of whose billing rates are reported to be north of $2,000 an hour. You run the clock at $2,000 an hour for a little while, not to mention if you have several other attorneys billing at similar rates, you're writing some big checks, even if you're Travis Scott. And if your revenue stream stops in the meantime, stuff's going to start to get real expensive real fast. All right, for part two, we're going to game plan out a few possible outcomes. I had a number of comments asking me to predict exactly what's going to happen. Now, of course, I do not have a crystal ball. I do not have any way to predict the future. If I did, I'd be playing the stock market, not being a lawyer. We're going to talk about three general areas. We're going to talk about potential criminal outcomes. We're going to talk about potential civil outcomes. And we're going to talk about potential non-judicial outcomes. So first, what about criminal outcomes? Of the three, this is the one that will be the least likely and the most difficult to pin on Travis Scott or any of the other performers or parties who were involved. Let's talk about the reasons for that. First of all, the standard to convict someone in a criminal case is beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, a lot of people have this phrase beyond a shadow of a doubt put into their heads because Johnny Cochran is that good, phrase that was used 20-something years ago in the OJ trial, and people still remember it. The relevant standard for a criminal trial is in fact beyond a reasonable doubt. What does that mean? Now, it's hard to quantify and put an exact number on it, probably somewhere around 90% or north of that. You're 95% sure that the guy did it. Now, each one of the elements of the crime has to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, whatever the elements of the particular crime being charged are, if you're the defense team, all you have to do is get a reasonable doubt as to one of those elements, and then the defendant must be acquitted of the charge. Meaning, A criminal charge is the hardest one to prove, is the hardest one to get a conviction on, is significantly harder to get a conviction on than it is to find someone liable in civil court. This is a generalized feature of the criminal system versus the civil system. Additionally, Travis Scott's legal team would in all likelihood prioritize the defense of any potential criminal charges over the defense of any civil claims. Why is this? Quite simply, it's a lot better to be broke than in jail. Moreover, the individual victims do not have control over the charging decision. The charging decision is at the discretion of the prosecutor, which is made according to a complex set of factors, including not only things like political concerns, but also their assessment of the evidence, manpower, what other things are on their plate, so on and so forth. So it is not at all guaranteed that the prosecutors are going to put this at the top of the list and push as hard as they possibly can. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. There is a complex mix of factors that will determine exactly what the prosecutors do here. Those are the potential criminal outcomes. Now we're going to talk about potential civil outcomes. Now the bad case here is that it's check writing time for all kinds of people and entities involved with this. LiveNation, Drake, Travis Scott, the organizer, the grounds owner, etc., etc., etc. The list goes on and on. These are the civil lawsuits that we were talking about at the beginning of the video and that continue to take off like a rocket. The most obvious target in any plaintiff attorney lawsuit, the most obvious target is always the insurance companies. Now this is where things get interesting. The insurance coverage in this case was reported to be $1 million for bodily injury plus a $25 million umbrella policy. That means that the total insurance proceeds in the pot here are $26 million. Now, if $1 billion is a realistic estimate of the amount on the line here, and I don't know if it is, but suppose that it is, that is a massive shortfall. Even if the potential liability is only $50 or $100 million, that's still a big, big shortfall that someone is going to have to be on the hook for. If the criminal case is the most difficult of the three to prove, the civil case is relatively easier. This is because the burden of proof in a civil case is not beyond a reasonable doubt, or that 90-95% number that we were talking about for the criminal. In a civil case, the burden of proof is a preponderance of the evidence. Now, that's a lawyer word if I've ever heard one. What does preponderance mean? Well, it means 51%. It quite simply means it is more likely than not that the defendant did the thing. All you have to do is prove each element of the tort with a preponderance of the evidence, meaning it's more likely than not, it's 51%, and you're good. It's a much lower standard for the plaintiff to meet in a civil case than for the prosecutor to meet in a criminal case. Why is that? Because we've made the judgment as a society that taking away someone's freedom, locking them up in jail, is a much more significant thing than taking their money and taking their stuff. I can understand that, but regardless, the point is, in the criminal case, you have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. In the civil case, you have to prove it to a preponderance of the evidence. That's a much lower bar, and certainly the plaintiff attorneys are indicating by their number of filings that they believe that they can get over that bar. Let's talk about some stuff that might happen outside of the courts as a result of what's going on here. Now, if you look at some of the press releases that have been put out by some of these plaintiff attorneys, a lot of them don't have their crosshairs mainly on Travis Scott. A lot of these guys are looking at LiveNation because LiveNation is what we call the deep pocket in the situation. LiveNation is, among all of the defendants who've been named here, LiveNation has the most money, the most liquid assets. They are the richest person in the room. They're going to exhaust the insurance proceeds. That's the low-hanging fruit. Then they're going to go after Travis Scott, Drake, LiveNation, whoever else. Let's suppose that the insurance company has to pay out the full $26 million or maybe more. Sometimes you can get an above policy limits judgment against an insurer to do bad things. But let's suppose that the insurer pays out the full $26 million. Let's suppose that LiveNation has to cough up a big check, and whatever happens to Travis Scott happens to Travis Scott. But let's suppose at a minimum that those two things happen to the insurer and to LiveNation. What is the result of that for Travis Scott's future career? I would submit that potentially his live career is over. He may be able to continue making studio albums where he can't be in front of a crowd. But if I'm an insurer, if I own a venue, if I'm a concert promoter, and you come to me and say, hey, would you like Travis Scott to perform at your amphitheater, at your stadium? Would you like Travis Scott to sing for all of these people? You can make some money, but there might be a crowd crush resulting in dozens of deaths and injuries, and you might be liable for millions of dollars. Sound like a fair deal? If I'm the insurer, I say I'm not writing that insurance policy. If I'm the owner of the venue, I say no thank you, schedule another artist that'll be just as good and make me just as much money. So it is entirely possible, and of course I don't have a crystal ball, I can't predict the future with complete certainty, but it is entirely possible here that Travis Scott is done playing concerts and festivals, and he's a studio artist from here on out. And it gets more possible the larger of a payout the insurers and LiveNation end up having to fork out to these plaintiff attorneys. The more money they have to pay, the less likely it becomes that they're going to want Travis Scott to perform at a venue that they organize for, insure, control, etc. in the future. All right, part 3 of the video, we've got a little correction to the last video. I showed in the previous video a clip of a fan at a Travis Scott show being incited to jump off of a balcony by Travis Scott. And I stated that that guy was paralyzed and was tied up in litigation because Travis Scott didn't want to pay, and that had been happening for several years. A few of the commenters pointed out to me that that was in fact not the case, that it was a different fan who had been pushed off of a balcony at the same venue who was in fact paralyzed and was in litigation with Travis Scott. I don't know that that's better, but there's your correction. Thank you guys for telling me. Again, if you think I'm getting something wrong or if you think I'm getting something out of context, I want to hear from you because I don't know what I'm doing. Part 4, we've got some new evidence to discuss about this whole Astroworld tragedy. First up is some footage from a strip club in Houston showing dollars all over the floor when apparently Drake and Travis Scott went out the day after the Astroworld tragedy and dropped over $1 million in cash at the Houston strip club. Let's play that footage. This is interesting because the story coming out of the Travis Scott camp was that he was unaware of the tragedy, which again, how on earth do you not know? But he was unaware of the tragedy until being told at the after party the night of the show at Dave & Buster's.
That mass casualty declaration, did it not get to your clients at all, or anyone on his team for that matter?
It absolutely did not. In fact, I think we've seen footage of police half an hour later, just walking about and not looking like it was a mass casualty event. But clearly, the important thing is that never got to Travis, that never got to Travis's crew. He's up there trying to perform. He does not have any ability to know what's going on down below, certainly on a mass level. You know what? Travis didn't really understand the full effect of everything until the next morning, truly.
Now, he's told that 8 people at that point had died in the show and leaves the after party, is very sad, very devastated, etc., but apparently not so sad and not so devastated that he can't go to the strip club and hang out and throw money everywhere the next day. Next up is an unconfirmed Reddit post, and if anybody has any evidence of this, please reach out to me or reach out to someone. Let's read the post. Says that Travis Scott tweeted earlier in the day encouraging gate crashing. Side note, we're going to talk about that later, and the gate crashing incident is going to be one of the central pieces of any of the plaintiff attorneys' cases here. There's just a mountain of evidence, and so much of it I haven't gotten a chance to go through or post about. He has a documented history of encouraging this type of behavior and not giving a shit about his fans' safety. Has been charged with inciting a riot at 1 or 2 of his previous concerts. As we talked about, it's actually 2, Arkansas, Lollapalooza. Stage operator, ? Coming up to him during his performance and telling him what was going on and asked him to address the crowd so that they would let emergency vehicles and personnel get to those in need. And he says, nah, fuck all that, and goes right into the next song. This, if it's true, is an absolute bombshell. As of right now, this is just some dude posting on Reddit. I have no idea. He could just be completely making it up. I don't know. But if there's any evidence of this, this is a really, really, really big deal and shows the kind of intent that gets you not only a win in the case, but some kind of punitive damages. Next up, we've got 7 different social media posts of Travis Scott praising violence and encouraging his fans. Apparently, the way that you get Instagram famous by making it a Travis Scott Instagram is you get rowdy and get injured at one of his shows. So here we are where Travis Scott says, only some make it, presumably encouraging fans to rush the stage. Here we are, we have Travis Scott says, she broke her hand and she doesn't give a f***. Here we have, it's not a show until someone passes out. Here we have a guy lying on the ground unconscious. And Travis Scott says, WTF. Here we have, to the kid that didn't survive the rodeo, you're a hero in my book. Now, I think by survive, he means the guy passed out. I don't believe that this guy actually died. Next, we have last day of tour was tonight very wild. To that kid who blacked out, you are a hero. Next, we have I love you to the fan who is bleeding out of the side of his eye. Again, I'd be pretty certain that these photos, they're going to find their way in front of the jury somehow or another. And this again presents you with a horrible 1-2 dilemma if you're one of the defendants, Travis Scott, LiveNation, Drake, whoever. Either you knew that this was possible and indeed even likely, in which case, game over, you're on the hook. Or, number two, you didn't know that this was possible and likely, in which case, either you're lying or you had your head in the sand like an ostrich because the evidence was right there for anyone to see. All right, next up, we've got some footage from a Travis Scott concert where fans are crowd surfing, rushing the stage, etc. And Travis Scott seems to tell security that if they keep holding the fans back from rushing the stage, that he's going to WWE suplex them. Let's play the clip.
Watch how y'all handling these motherfuckers, man. All they want to do is have fun. He made it to the stage, you ain't got to force him out. Just grab him a little bit and put him to the side, bro. Put him back in the crowd. If I see y'all touching another motherfucker like this again, I'm going to hit a motherfucking WWE suplex on all of this.
So that's it for today. Like I said, we've got a lot more material. Don't forget to subscribe, like the video. Take care. We'll see you next time.